Morning, everyone. We are on
Morning.
Tes Zayin Amid Aleph, towards the bottom. We had the Gemara was asking about what the enactment of glass was. The Gemara says that really it's similar to earthenware in that it comes from the ground. It's made out of sand, but in certain ways it's like metal in that it can be just like metal. It can be reconstituted. It can be restructured. You have just like metal, you can reheat it and it'll start and it'll be reconstructed. So the Gemara says in certain things it's like metal, in certain things it's like earthenware. So the Gemara asks now. So in which way is it like metal? The Gemara said that shutehen. The Gemara said that it will have tumah on the outside. That's like metal. It's like earthenware that doesn't have a retroactive tumah, whereas when you break it and fix it, solder it together, you heat it up and put it back together, that will count. The original tumah will go back. It doesn't with glass. That's not the case. The Gemara said for that, because that's a derabanan, and glass is a derabanan, it would be a double derabanan. We didn't make a double derabanan for the reconstituting the glass would then make the tumah again. We do have the Gemara asks, there is one thing that it's not like glass, which is the oraisa. Because the shutei kli matches said earlier that a flat piece of metal, a sheet of metal, is going to be susceptible to tumah. Doesn't have to be a receptacle, but a flat piece of glass, non-receptacle, is not susceptible to tumah. Why is that? Gemara says, and that's what we're up to. Shutei and miyolitami. This is the third to last line of Tazayin Amad Aleph. The shutei kliates and klimatres, a flat piece of metal, is the oraisa. That's a Torah level tumah. So therefore, glass, which is similar, should also have that tumah because it's only a single derabanan. Avdibu rabanan akeru ke'echad le'lisser v'layat tumah v'kachim. So Gemara says you're right. However, the Rabbanan wanted to keep one level of tumah, which is different than metal, even though it's biblical, even though it's the oraisa, in order to maintain the awareness to everybody that glass is a rabbinic tumah and not a oraisa tumah. Had they made all of the oraisa tumahs that apply to metal also apply to glass, people would think that glass is tamei de oraisa. And then when teruma and kachim touch them, they would think, oh, I need to burn the teruma or I need to burn the kachim because it's now tamei, but it's only tamei de rabbana. Only in the previous 6 cases, which were safek de oraisa, there was a doubt and there was a chance that it was biblically tamei, that it had come into contact with the oraisa tumah. There, we said that the Chachamim enacted on the doubt that you would also burn them. But something that the foundational structure of its tumah, such as glass, is the Rabbanan. We don't burn the teruma when it touches it, or the kachim when it touches it. So in order to make sure that people are aware that this is the Rabbanan, the Chachamim when they enacted the tumah, left a hakera one aspect of the tumah that does not apply, and in this case, it's the tumah for pshutei kli zechuchis, a flat piece of glass that doesn't have a receptacle. That tumah would not apply.
Excuse me. So for glass, it would be toilet.
So
glass would be tola. We don't burn it, but it would be tola, right?
No, that tumah does not apply
At all. So you could
on a pshutei kli zechuchis.
So a pshutei kli zechuchis comes in contact with truma. You go ahead and eat the truma.
Correct. It's not susceptible to tumah as a pshutei kli. It doesn't have tumah.
But you told me the rabbanon, so I thought, well, maybe it's toilet.
Yeah,
okay.
no,
it's not toilet.
Yeah. So the Gemara says, Tezayin Amid Beis, on 16b, Rav Ashi Amar La'olam L'Kli Cheres Dam. Rav Ashi's answer is, you know why a flat piece of glass is not susceptible to tumah? Because it's really more like earthenware. And in reality, we're not saying that it's like metal besides for one or two things, but it's the other way around. It's really like earthenware. But you notice that indeed, and that's why the flat piece of glass is not susceptible to tumah, because it's like earthenware, which it has to be a receptacle. If it's not a receptacle, it's not going to have tumah. But you had a question earlier, so then why is the outside of glass susceptible to tumah? Earthenware vessel is only susceptible to tumah on the inside, and over here you're saying that the outside of glass is susceptible to tumah. Gemara says, the reason is because glass is actually see-through, and since it's see-through, the inside and outside look the same. You look at the outside and it looks like the inside, and therefore we treat the outside as the inside. But of course, like earthenware, it shouldn't be that way. So that's the end of the explanation of Gemara on the enactment of tumah for glass. Shimon Meshetach tiken ksuba leisha. Shimon Meshetach enacted ksuba for a woman. V'gazar tumah kli matches, and he enacted tumah on metal vessels. Now, we talk about the whole time, metal is susceptible to tumah d'oraisa, but the Gemara is going to bring the verse for it. The pasuk says, "Kli matchas d'oraisa," and it's d'oraisa. The chsibur says, "Achas hazav es hakesef," but gold and silver. And the pasuk continues, "Nechoshes copper, v'sabar zel v'sabedil v'saferes," and steel and lead and another type of lead. But it's clear that metal is included. It says, no, the concept that we mentioned yesterday, that a metal that was broken down and then soldered together, reheated and reconstructed, that maintains a tumah, is actually a rabbinic enactment. And that's what it means that Shimon Meshetach enacted that. The Amar of Yehuda Amar Rav, Maisa b'Shaltzion Amalka. There's Shaltzion Amalka, Shlomtzion Amalka. These were queens that were very powerful in the of the Hasmonean dynasty. And so Shaltzion Amalka, Sha'asta Mishla B'na. She made a party for her son. V'nitmu kol kalea. And on the day of the wedding, on the day of the party, all her vessels, her cutlery, whatever it was, became tummy, and became tummy from a deceased person. So now she's got a wedding to make, and all her cutlery is not kosher. It's tummy. So what'd she do? V'shavrasan v'nasnasan l'tzorif. So she had her servants break each one of the vessels, and she gave them to a smith, and he softened them, and he soldered them back together. So all of the vessels were reconstructed. Now, if this is a public scene of avoiding the proper tahara for a kli that became tamei b'tamei mace, it needs to wait 7 days, and then have the red heifer spritzed on it, the red heifer water spritzed on it on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, and then only could it become tahar on the 8th day. That's the proper way. And in a public defiance of that, Shaltzion circumvented it. And if that would be allowed, it would never be the red heifer spritz and the tahara, 7-day tahara of tumas mace for vessels. That would never happen anymore because people would have learned from Shaltzion this idea. The Chacham said, it's got to maintain the old tumah. My time otherwise we would lose the concept of mechatas for vessels. So Gemara says that's a good reason if you hold like the opinion that this concept that an old tumah of a metal vessel that's broken and reconstructed, soldered together and reconstructed, brings back the original tumah is only applicable to tumas mace. If that's true, then you're right. It happened because of the story of Shaltzion Malka, and in order to not avoid the 7 days of tahara, people, in order to avoid it, people would just break the vessel instead of doing the proper tahara process, and then we would lose the halacha of the tahara process. And so, in order to maintain the proper tahara process, the Chacham said if you restructure the metal vessel, it maintains its tumah. So that would make sense if it only applied to tamei mace when it's tamei from someone that's deceased, and that would indeed be one opinion. But according to the opinion, the whole tumas amru, that this was applicable not only to tumas mace but to all tumah, even to tumas sheretz and so on, and they don't have a 7-day tahara. Just put it in the mikveh that day and it would be tor. So why was that enacted? Why was that enacted according to their opinion? There the problem is because if you have a metal vessel, let's say a pot or a jug, and you have to make a hole in it, you have to break it so that there's a hole large enough that not only it can contain liquids, not only it can't contain grains, but it has to not be able to contain even larger fruits like a pomegranate. So the size of the hole has to be kamotzi rimon, which is a pretty sizable hole. And we're afraid that people would make a smaller hole because they're going to re-solder it and reconstruct it. And since they're reconstructing it, they may not make a proper hole. And therefore, the Chachamim enacted that the tumah would not leave, so that people not try this.
Sorry to interrupt. What page are we on?
We are on 16b.
Thanks.
So somebody's asked a question just to clarify the question. So if a metal, so I think the question is, well, if you totally melt, the metal down and reform it entirely from the beginning, would that also maintain its tumah? And the answer is no. It's only if you still have some patches of the old and you're resoldering it together, you're restructuring it, but not where you're totally melting the metal down and reforging it, I don't want to say rebuilding because I've used that word for soldering it together, but reforming a new metal vessel, that would make it tahor. Everybody agreed to that. The Chachamim did not enact a lack of tumah for that.
Wait, so if you took the metal, melted it all down, poured the metal into a mold, finished it off, that would not still retain tumah?
Correct.
Only if you put pieces back together and solder them.
Correct. Or coated it or something like that. Yeah.
And this is something intrinsic in, what I'm asking is, I don't know how to ask it. Is it something intrinsic, or is it something that the Chachamim didn't like the idea of breaking things up and soldering them together in the
No, the reason is that they just, like the Gemara just explained, if the original, according to the opinion that it was originally only done for Tumas Mace, it was because they were afraid that the people were going to avoid the 7-day Tahara and the Torah Aduma and just break it and solder it. And according to the opinion that it goes to all tumas, the reason was because they were afraid that people would not, since they need to resolder and restructure it, that they would just make a small break in it and they wouldn't actually properly break it to the degree that it was no longer a vessel.
But it's not something intrinsic in the nature of tuma.
Correct.
I have a question. How common is it that these vessels came in contact with a mace?
If somebody died in a tent and it was in the house, I mean,
So,
that happened all the time. Somebody passed away, and there are vessels in the house, and now you have to kosher all the vessels. You have to be metaher all the vessels because they are tamei from the house.
this is vessels that are used for eating, or are there vessels for other purposes as well?
Any vessels. It could be a cooking utensil. It could be a bed frame. It could be there are many.
Wow.
Yeah, metal vessels in the house have to go through a tahara process.
So you need to move the person outside before they die.
They usually would have a specific way that they would put them in a specific room, and take the vessels out of the room, and designate a door that it would go through and stuff like that.
So it was not the whole house, just the room.
Well, it could be depending on whether they were prepared properly or not. Yeah.
Okay. There should be a book on that.
Reading it.
Who said we're reading it?
Me,
Yeah.
Charles.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just as a side note, Rashi over here on this discussion of the Gemara that says that there's a machlokes of whether or not the original enactment of the Tumah on reconstituted metal, is it restructured metal? Is it applied only to Tumas Mace or to all Tumah? Rashi says, I don't know where that machlokas is. And we talked about this in Brachos where Rashi said it, and Rav Kivega had a list of places that Rashi said it, and he says it over here on this staff and on the next staff. Rashi did not need to comment on that. Rashi could have just left it, and since he didn't know where it is, not made mention of the source because he didn't know it. But Rashi did say so, and we learn the sense of humility. It is important in Torah to know that we don't know it all, and that there are things that we need to say. Any idea? I don't know. And even though Rashi didn't have to respond to it and say anything, he did here and on the next stop to tell us that it is important to learn to say it is important to say any idea. Yes, Tuvia. Liquefying the metal, it seems, is not the same tuma as just soldering it. That's what Rashi says over here. The idach might. Rava Omar. Rava says it's not on account of maybe he won't break it improperly, but rather it's on account of that people seeing it may think that the tvila of that day is sufficient because people see, they know that the vessel became tamei, and they see that you're using the vessel. So they say, it must be that it is okay to use on that on that day, even though that you didn't wait till the sun set, and that's not true. And they don't know that it became tahor not through a mikvah, but because you reconstituted, you restructured it. The Gemara says, so my benai, what's the difference? That you that you coated it with a new coat. So if you say, we're going with the second version of Rashi. So if you say that it's only on account of that you may not break it properly, so there people may think that it would apply even if you put on a new coat, a new sheet of a coat of metal, it looks nice and new, and people are going to think that you didn't break it properly, or people won't break it to the correct size. However, if the reason is that people may think that you didn't take it to the mikveh, when you put on a new coat, people say, oh, they restructure that. I can tell because it all looks new. Must be that they covered it with a new coat of metal, and they must have broken it and resoldered it. And so therefore they know that really a tamei vessel, even after it goes to mikveh, needs to wait till sunset. And the reason this one is tar even on the same day is not because tuma doesn't, because you don't have to wait to sunset, but rather because this one was restructured because it has a nice new coat on it. V'idach mai. So the Gemara then says, okay, so what are the rest of the 18 things that were enacted in the edict of Hanan? So the Gemara says, mai, the Tanan we learned. So if you remember, we talked about a mikveh needs to have rainwater that were not collected in a receptacle. Even whether or not that vessel is a halachic vessel in regards to tuma, it is, as long as it's a receptacle, it counts as a vessel and no longer rainwater, unless everybody would agree if you by mistake left a vessel somewhere and rain fell into it, and then it overflowed from there into a mikveh, that would be fine. For instance, you built a mikveh in your backyard, and the mikveh is, and you're waiting for the rainwater to fill it. And in a part of your work, you had a bucket there, and that bucket, it starts raining, and it collects enough water, rainwater, that either the bucket tips or the bucket overflows, and it runs into your mikveh. That would not invalidate the mikveh, on account of even though it went into a receptacle, it never was intended to be in a receptacle in that vessel. It just happened to be there by mistake, and it on its own went into the mikveh, so that's going to be fine. However, the question that the Gemara is discussing is where you put it there with the intent of collecting water in some way. But then it became impractical, and you would have brought it back in. But you forgot it. Does that count or not? So the case is like this. Tanam we learn. Somebody put a bucket, vessels beneath the gutter, and Rashi points out that there are various ways that the gutter would not be considered a receptacle and a vessel. So the gutter brings the water, and the water is running off the roof through this non-receptacle vessel gutter, and it runs into the vessels that you put there with the intent of gathering the water. You put it there with the intent of gathering the rainwater. Regardless if they are large vessels or small vessels, and even if they are stoneware or a clump of clay that you hollowed out, which is different than earthenware, which we said is made out of mud, clay, and turned into a vessel. This is just like a clump of clay that you hollowed out, or kli glalim, or dungware. They would make vessels out of dried dung. Rashi over here uses the old German word of Middle German, and didn't write the word belaz, or it's not in the text, and so people thought he was writing shayish, that it was marble, and that would be stoneware, which would apply to tumah. So that's not the case. But Rashi's talking about dungware, as Rashi says elsewhere. In any case, so the halacha is, in all these cases, even though that these vessels, being of inferior type would not be susceptible to tuma. Nevertheless, they are a receptacle, and in regards to maim she'uvin, gathered water, it would count as gathered water. So the halacha is that it would poselanas hamikvah, the water that came from that bucket, is going to count as gathered water and will not be valid for the mikvah, and it will invalidate a mikvah if the mikvah didn't have 40 seah prior to that. However, Beishamai say, regardless of whether you put it there and intended for it to gather now, or if you left it there by mistake, meaning you put it there originally to gather water, but that you had intended to stop that usage, but it was there with the original intent, and then you left it there, you forgot it, that forgetting will not invalidate, will not change your mind, because originally it was placed there for gathering water. That's Beishamai's opinion. And Beisil say, no, since you forgot it, even though originally you intended to gather water, and maybe you even did gather some water, but then you left it there by mistake, you forgot it, so it will not be maim she'uvin, and it would not invalidate it. Amar of Meir Nimnu v'Rabu Beishamai B'Silul, that in this was one of the cases where Beishamai were majority over Beisilul, and they ruled, and therefore there's no longer the machlokes because it was already accepted majority rule, and Beisilul had to accept the majority opinion. Rabbi Beishamai B'Silul, Umoida Beishamai. However, there's a caveat. Beishamai will agree to the original opinion of Beisilul that it would not count b'shechech b'chatzah, where you forgot it in the courtyard. You never intended for it to be a receptacle for water, and that's the original case I told you, where he never put it under the gutter, which was gathering water. Rather, he left it in the backyard by mistake. Shehutar, so there the water is going to maintain its natural state as long as he didn't pick it up and pour it into the mikvah. If the mikvah tipped, the bucket tipped into the mikvah, or it overflowed into the mikvah, it'll be fine. Amar Rabbi Yossi. Sorry?
So what if you had your situation, you're putting a mikvah in the backyard, and you have boards and other building materials that you've laid out on the ground, and it starts raining, and that directs all the water into the mikvah?
That for sure is not going to be a problem, because you had no intention of that being a receptacle for the rain. So the rain happens to go there. That's not going to be a problem. Just like if you make, and in fact we sometimes utilize such trenches or whatever, but those are not vessels. But there's no receptacle here. You have a flat piece of wood, or you have a bucket, and you did not intend for it to be gathering the water and then overflowing into the mikveh, but rather it's acting as a gathering water, but by mistake, because you had no intent of it being a source of the water gathering. That's not a problem.
The whole thing with the whole thing with like a rain gutter that directs the water in a certain location.
Right. Those are non-vessels. So it would either be attached. Rashi gave two cases, and actually Rashi gave one case, and the Mishnah it says another case. One is where it was not a receptacle prior to being attached to the house. So, and when it's attached to the ground, it was not yet a receptacle. So they took a piece of wood, a log, and attached it to the ground, either to the house, which is attached to the ground, or to the ground, and then they hollowed it out. So it only became a vessel once attached to the ground, and there's no such thing as a vessel attached to the ground, because your mikveh itself could be a vessel then. If it's attached to the ground, it's not a vessel. Or, that's the case Rashi brings here, and the Mishnah there says another case where it doesn't have any receptacle. So it doesn't have the walls. It's just a vessel that is guiding the water. So you had a slanted roof. The water is being guided down into the mikveh, but it's just a flat piece of wood. That's not going to be a receptacle, and therefore it's not going to be a tumah So it's not going to be a gathered water, maim she'uvin, into your mikveh. But the
So
point being over here is that the bucket that you left in the backyard, if you left it in the yard and it was never meant to gather the water, everybody agrees it's fine. If you put it under the bucket, under the drain, and it was intended to gather water and it actually did, so everybody agrees that's no good. The machlokas is where you put it there to gather water and it did, or it didn't, whichever it is. But then it no longer became practical to gather water. For instance, it became a sunny day and the forecast was sunny for the next week. And you said, you know what, I should just bring that bucket in, we're done. Or something like that, where you no longer wanted the bucket there. Originally, you had placed it there with intent of gathering water, but you no longer want it there. So at this point, it's not intended as a gathering. That's called shocheach. You've forgot it there, even though originally it was put there with intent. And now it's gathering the water from the place that you originally intended it to gather. That's where Beis Hillel say doesn't count, because at this point I didn't want it there and I forgot it. Beis Shammai say no, since originally you put it there, since you originally put it there with the intent of gathering water, and it did its function, even though that in between you changed your mind, but its original function was there, original intent was there, and you're changing your mind and having left it there by mistake doesn't change it, and therefore it's considered gathered water and invalidates the mikvah.
Is this an extension? Is this part of the same sugi as Maleches Machsheves, or
No,
is it
nothing
just
to do with Shabbos.
it just seems like
that's only for Shabbos. Maleches Machsheves is a Shabbos thing. Well, not only for Shabbos, it sometimes comes up elsewhere, but as this is not it. This has to do with whether or not this is actually a contained water, or it happens to be gathered water, or it happens to be contained in a vessel. But it's not gathered water. That's this. Melachas Machshavas generally applies to Shabbos. It could be that there are some other melachas as well, other places as well that it will apply, but not generally. We say Melachas Machshavas is a Shabbos thing. This has to do with your intent in regards to gathering the water. So the Rabbi Meir says that this was one of the 18 things, and therefore the count was taken. Beis Shammai were the majority. Beis Hillel had to accept it, and therefore there's no machlokas anymore. However, Rabbi Yossi says adayin machlokas. The machlokas is there. It's not a part of the 18 things. It was not. They were never together to discuss it. They never took a consensus. They never took a count, and therefore it remains a machlokas. Amar Rishar Shabrei the Rav. He explains, like we just explained a moment ago, that actually these the halacha applies only when there was intent. Amri hakol madik shenech b'shas kisher oven. If you put the vessels out in your backyard or underneath the drain, when the clouds were out, domain that the water is going to be invalid. B'shas pisur oven. If you put it out there when there were no clouds, meaning that you could not have intended for it to gather water because there were no clouds, the rakol taharim. Everybody says it's fine. So rather than the machlokas, where you put it out when there was raining or there was a forecast to rain. And then the clouds disappeared, and it became a nice blue sky. Where at that point you say, forget it, it's not going to rain. I should bring my buckets in. And then it started raining again. Then Beis Hillel say, all right, your original thought's gone, and therefore at this point it's just forgotten vessels, and it doesn't count as gathered water. And the other says, no, your original intent is still there. So the Gemara says, okay, great. But what about Rabbi Yossi? According to Rabbi Yossi, it says that the machlokas still stands, meaning that they never did a count of opinion about this, and they were never together about this subject. The machlokas adayim and kuma medas batzriluhus. He's missing one. So this will come up a few times. Amar Nachman Yitzchak af b'nois kusim nidas marisasam b'yom gazer. That the kuti, which are they were a group of people that converted to Judaism, but never really lived it. They became another religion, essentially similar to Judaism, imitating some things. These are the probably the original Shomronim, Sumerians, and they're up on Har Gerizim, and they were not, some things they kept, some parts of Torah they kept, and some parts they didn't. And so the enactment was that even a 1 day old girl, Kutite, has a status of a nida, because there is a possibility of someone being a nida even before puberty, and since they're not careful about this, we don't know how to treat them. And so from when they're born, it was enacted that they be treated as a nida. Tosfos has a question about this. What about the opinion that says that they were never really true converts, so it shouldn't apply? Some other questions. In any case, but that enactment would be the filler for when somebody disagrees with one of them. We'll say this again on the next daf. Also, wait, what about they're missing one? Oh, this is the one that this is the one that they are going to include. V'idach mai, and what's the others? The Tanam we learned usually we say that in order for something to count as a cover to transfer tumah, so like the question we said earlier, that if there's a tumah mace and then a dead person, and then there is something covering them and covers a vessel, that would count as a tumah transferred through the cover. That cover would have to at least be a tefach wide. But in regards to a prodding stick that was used by shepherds, the halacha would be that rod did not have to be a tefach wide, but even if in the circumference it was a tefach, a total tefach, so this is a third of a tefach essentially, it would also count as transferring the tumah, and that was a rabbinic enactment. Amar Rav Tarfon. So Rav Tarfon said, "A kapeach b'ni es b'ni." We're now in 17a. Kapeach es b'ni shezu halacha mekapachas. I will lose my children. He was so frustrated by the misinterpretation of this halacha, and then he said that this is like I'm losing my child. Halacha zu mekapachas. This is a shazu halacha mekapachas. This is a cut off halacha. Sheshoma shemei avata. Somebody heard something and totally misunderstood it and misinterpreted it. What halacha actually was, what happened was that there was somebody harvesting, some farmer was walking, and he had on his shoulder this mardea, this rod, and one end of it was over a grave, and it not only made him the rod tameh because it was ohel, but it also made him tameh because he was in direct contact. He was holding the tumah. Tosfos has a different version. We're going with Rashi here. And the reason over there was not because it transferred tumah to another vessel, but it became tameh. The rod itself became tameh because it was over the grave, and he became tameh because he was in direct contact with it. But and even though that in order to transfer tumah, it needs a tefach, for it to become susceptible to tumah itself, any width would count. And so this was wide enough to contract tumah itself, but it did not need tumah. It did not transfer tumah to something else through a tent, through hovering over it. It was in direct contact that he became tumah. Amar Rabbi Kiva ani atake. So he says, you know what? Rabbi Kiva says, you're right. It was misunderstood, but it still does have some sort of rabbinic enactment that it'll transfer tumah through its other end. The words of the Chachamim could be correct. That what it means is that any movable vessel that that is the width of a mardea, meaning that even though it's not a tefach wide itself, but it would be a tefach in its circumference, that it will bring tuma, and it'll actually need the spritz of the red heifer. If a person is carrying it, which is a touch of the oraisa, that's a biblical. He's touching it, so he's in contact with it. So that's the oraisa tuma. So therefore, they also enacted that there will be a derabanan tuma of ohel, a rabbinic level tuma of ohel, that it'll bring it to itself and to al shar adam mekalim but pesach tefach. But usually for people and vessels, it would need a tefach itself. 1 second, let me just. So the concept is that the person himself that is touching this tumah would need a tumah for that day and not for 7 days. Give me a moment. Right. Since he's not being tame for that, for actually being in the same tent, because it's not wide enough. Rather, his tumah is just because he touched something that was tame from a mace. He only needs to go to the mikveh that day, and in that evening he's going to be tahor, and he doesn't have to have a full 7-day tahara. And that's the explanation of the Chachamim. They say that Malim Ardea is going to cause a tumah. That's this concept that there's a tumah, even though it doesn't need a 7-day tumah. I think we're out of time, and we have to go to Shachris. Let me check if the Keser. So in conclusion, we have a tumah, tumas oil, which is a tent tumah, meaning where tumah is transferred by a shared cover, always goes 7 days. And then over here, where he's only in contact with something that was over the tumah, he only has the 7. He only has the 1 day. In any case, according to Rabbi Tarfon, the Gemara asks, Rabbi Tarfon, so according to Rabbi Tarfon, who says that this is not a part of that enactment, and there's no such thing as a tumah of a mardea transferring tumah, it only becomes tumah itself. So what's the midaraisa? There would be a tumah for anybody touching it, but it wouldn't be a rabbinic enactment. So what is the he's missing one in the count of 18. So so he's saying the same idea that what the Gemara said earlier for Rabbi Yossi, that the day-old Kutite girls be counting as Anida was enacted in that day, and that counts as 18. But we needed that for Rabbi Yossi, who be Idas Rabbi Meir. And in regards to the buckets in the backyard under the gutter, he holds like Rabbi Meir that was in the count. So therefore, he doesn't need to use it in the count over there. So either he holds like Rabbi Meir, and so over there he holds like Rabbi Meir, and therefore he can use what Rabbi Yossi used over there, he uses over here. And Rabbi Yossi must hold like Rabbi Akiva over here. V'idach. What else do we have? We have habotzer legas. So this is, we'll start this concept we talked about a few days ago. If somebody is harvesting grapes and he puts the grapes into a wicker basket and some of the grapes start oozing juice, and he likes that juice because he wants to turn, he plans on turning it, he's not eating the grapes as table grapes, he plans on turning it into wine. So therefore, what's coming out is actually something he would want to retain, even though it's a wicker basket and it's going to run out. But he does want it to retain it. And so then the liquid should count as proper juice. And as you remember, the halacha is that any liquid will make produce susceptible to tuma if there's intent, because the Torah says ki yitain when you put water onto a liquid onto the fruit, but it's pronounced ki yutan if it is placed, reflexive, if it happens to pour on. And the Gemara says the meaning is you have to intentionally want it there, even if it happens on its own. And over here, where he wants the juice, it should count as he wants it on his own. So therefore, it should count as the juice making the produce susceptible to tumah. However, since it's not in a vessel that can contain the juice, so it's not actually a juice. It's just the